Hello, welcome to Steven Shinder Reviews in video form. I've talked on this channel about the Planet of the Apes films, some Star Wars, a little bit of Star Trek so far, but now I'm going to talk about Doctor Who now that the new season is underway. You know, the new Series 1 or Series 14 or Season 40 or whatever you want to call it. It's Doctor Who any way you put it. I specifically want to talk about the latest episodes, Space Babies, and what's the other one called? Oh my gosh, The Devil's Chord. Yeah, so I'm gonna talk about those episodes, assuming that if you're watching this, you've seen those episodes. So there will be spoilers on those. But I'm also gonna structure this video in a way where I'm going to refer to stuff that I'm gonna put at the end of this video, stuff that'll refer to the Chibnall era, you know, the 13th Doctor's era, because I know there are some people who sort of skipped over that era, or maybe they fell off sometime during the Moffat era and they might have jumped back in this new era and might circle back to that other stuff later. So, you know, the Doctor Who spoilers, you know, are very weird to handle right now. It's very wibbly wobbly, timey wimey, or you know, or whatever. So I'm gonna specifically talk about some 13th Doctor era stuff that's related to a little bit of this, about at the very end of this video. And so I've talked about the 60th anniversary specials and the Christmas special from last year a little bit on my podcast Delayed Replay, where if you're not familiar with that podcast, I get friends on and we improvise recaps and reviews of movies that got delayed as if they came out on time. So we make up some stuff and it's a lot of fun. But at the end of each episode, or some of the episodes, I talk about some other stuff, you know, stuff I've actually been watching. So if you look through that podcast catalog in the November and December episodes, at some point you will be able to find my thoughts, you know, at the end of a couple of those episodes where I talk about, you know, general thoughts on the 60th anniversary specials and the Christmas special. But in short, I really enjoyed those specials. I especially loved the Giggle and the Church on Ruby Road. I thought those were solid. But it looks like the Church on Ruby Road is sort of retroactively becoming the first episode of this new season. And I get the feeling that that might be what was originally intended. You know, they're hoping to air these other episodes in January, but for some reason pushed them back to May. But yeah, I kind of wonder, like, would there have been a three, or I guess not, because that would have aired on Christmas, and these two would have aired like New Year's Day, basically. Um, but yeah, I thought Church on Ruby Road was a solid start to this era, and these new latest two episodes, I would say, are not as strong, but there is stuff to enjoy about them, and there is some stuff moving the story forward. But yeah, I'll just get right into it. So, Space Babies. It begins with a recap of sorts. You know, the Doctor explaining to Ruby basically the premise of the show. You know, who he is, where he's from, all of that, and the recap feels like a very condensed version of some actual events. You know, the Doctor says that he was adopted by the Time Lords, and that Gallifrey is gone, and you know there was a genocide. And again, I'm going to talk about the specifics of that at the very end, because some of that relates to the 13th Doctor's era. But yeah, it feels very much like some of that stuff is being, it's not being ignored, but it's being recapped in a broad strokes sort of approach. And I think there are mixed results to that. I think it's good to not info dump everything, like all the details, and again, maybe people will want to try circling back to that other era. But I do think it could sort of confuse people. Like what we've seen so far, people might have a different idea of how we got to this status quo about what the current premise of the show is. Some people might even say it's a soft reboot of sorts, but yeah, I'll get back to all of that, like I said, at the very end. Interestingly, when the Doctor talks about these titles that the Time Lords have, there's no mention of the Master, but there is a mention of the Ronnie, one of the villains that people have been speculating could be coming back for like over a decade, probably. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not really holding on to that idea. But yeah, the Doctor's explanation that the Time Lords are kind of posh, I thought was a kind of a funny way to explain the titles. And all the Time Lords don't all have these titles, but it makes sense that the Doctor would kind of want to hand wave things away instead of like doing a long explanation. Just right away go on the adventure. There's also a little Star Trek reference. Ruby mentions Star Trek, and the Doctor is like, must visit them someday. And comic book readers will know that the 11th Doctor and the 4th Doctor have met Star Trek characters, the TNG crew in the 11th Doctor's case, and the TOS crew in the Fourth Doctor's case, in the crossover comic book story, Assimilation Squared, which is really excellent, which can be surprising when it comes to crossover comics. But yeah, I kind of now want to see the 15th Doctor have a crossover with one of the current ongoing Star Trek comics. I'm just not sure like which iteration I'd prefer to see him with, but I think that could be a lot of fun. We do see some characters with Star Trek esque uniforms in this Space Babies episodes, but again, different enough so that they don't get into any legal trouble. I'm sure. The Space Babies, and going into this episode, media that contains babies who can talk can be very hit and miss, especially if it's live action. So I was pretty much prepared to lower my expectations. I thought some of the stuff here was kind of just fine, just okay. There was this whole thing with this monster on the ship, and when it was revealed what it was, I thought it was just, yeah, it was just so too silly for me. Um, so the monster, the boogeyman, is actually made of bogies or boogers, as yeah, it's just so gross and so, yeah, this made me downgrade the episode, to be honest. It reminded me of the very short Treks episode, bringing it back to Star Trek, that involved a culture that was all into boogers, and it was just like so gross, so like not painfully unfunny. And I like puns. Both of my novels are littered with puns, but this just didn't work for me. With the snot that fell on Ruby, and the Doctor just laughing about it after he realizes what's going on. If I were Ruby and experienced that, I would be pissed at the Doctor for laughing about it. The Doctor's attitude is a bit weird. He's very jovial, which is great. He's very lighthearted, but that moment, and also the moment where he talks about the Time Lords being gone and how he's the only one, he seems a little bit too happy in that moment. And I know that there's, uh, people have pointed out that the whole thing of acting like you're okay and you smile and laugh on the outside, but really you're hurting deep down inside. And, that's very real. But it still comes across very weird. These little things about the Doctor's attitude here and there. But he's great overall. Don't get me wrong. I think Shooty is doing a great job as the Doctor. Also, this whole thing of the Doctor being the last of his kind, I feel like it's getting a little repetitive. You know, that status quo being reset to that, it's like, oh my gosh, here we go again. And just the reiteration of that. And connecting that to this uh, boogie man, this booger monster thing, and be like, oh, I have to save it because it's the last of its kind. And obviously, there's a lot more to it than that. I mean, you've seen the episode, so um, when it involves this booger monster, it's hard for me to take that introspective moment of the Doctor very seriously because, you know, it's boogers and there's fart humor in this episode with the way the smoke comes out of the ship toward the end. So I feel like this is kind of tonally co- I don't know if tonally confused is the right way to describe it. It feels like it's trying to mush together various tones, and that does work in some episodes. And again, this is subjective. This is my personal tastes and whatnot. It just didn't work for me here. But yeah, the babies are saved, and I guess things are going to be fine and whatnot. I was more interested in this whole thing of the Doctor seeming like he's, you know, he sees a memory um, of seeing Ruby's mother on that Christmas where she left her outside of the church, and you know, there's the hooded figure pointing at the Doctor, and then it feels like the memory has come out, and there's like snowflakes. I'm very curious to see what's going on there. Um, oh, I also forgot to mention at the beginning, there's that whole butterfly effect thing that was like in the trailer. You know, Ruby steps on a butterfly, it changes her, and the Doctor undoes it by, I guess, somehow healing the butterfly. It looked like he used his breath to heal the butterfly. I'm not sure what happened there. I don't remember this happening in prior Doctor Who stuff. So if anyone has any insights on that, feel free to comment on that. But yeah, I thought this was kind of an odd episode. You know, obviously Doctor Who has had pretty campy episodes, but because it involves boogers, which are very gross and disgusting, it was hard for me to really enjoy this episode all that much. So I realistically, I don't know. I was thinking of giving it a 6, but the booger of it all makes me want to give it a 5. So I'll just split the difference and say 5.5 out of 10 for this episode. I do see that some people really enjoyed this, but and again, this is all subjective. This is just how much I liked the episode. So there's that. Also note how the Doctor says he cannot take Ruby to the point where her mother left her, and Ruby seems fine with that at the moment as they go back to see the mother who adopted and raised her, you know, again from the Christmas special. And I like the little detail of how when the TARDIS arrives inside the house, it crushes like the top part of the TARDIS uh breaks a bit of the ceiling, so it's like, oh, that better get fixed. Like, yeah. And then there's a scan of Ruby and there's snowflakes in the TARDIS, and after the Doctor departs to say hi to the family. So yeah, very interesting foreboding feeling there. I'm very curious like what's gonna happen, as you know, what's going on with Ruby. You know, we'll find out by the end of the season, I'm sure. What's kind of strange, you know, I'm gonna go into the Devil's Chord in a bit, but what's kind of strange is I remember Russell T Davies saying somewhat recently, I think around the time the Giggle came out, that he wanted to loosen up the canon a bit, but he allows these lines of dialogue where the doctor says stuff like, "I've never seen anything like this before," in the Space Babies episode, I think in reference to the monster, but also in The Devil's Chord, when Ruby says, "Let's go see the Beatles," and the doctor is like, "Why have I never done that before?" That feels very much the opposite of loosening up the canon. It feels like it negates these possible expanded universe things where the doctor could have encountered similar monsters, um or was it in reference to the monster, or was it in reference to the memory thing? I don't remember, but yeah, like it kind of negates stuff like that, and instances where the doctor has met the Beatles in some other stories or mentions meeting them. There is a Big Finish audio drama that I listened to almost 4 years ago, maybe three and a half. It was really fun. It's called Fanfare for the Common Men, and it involves the Beatles not being around, and instead you have a band called the Common Men. It involves the Fifth Doctor. It's a lot of fun. I highly recommend checking that out. But the Devil's Chord has a different premise. But yeah, again, it's really odd that Russell throws in those, canon air quotes limiting lines instead of keeping things vague. You have the Doctor in Wild Blue Yonder seeming like he's never been to the end of the universe or whatever, and it's really, or the edge of the universe or whatever it was, and it's really strange to think that in all the Doctor Who media that's come out, like that's never happened with them before. Like, really? Like, what? So I kind of wish that the lines were more vague and not like, there's this whole thing I've heard, this bit of advice, or it's like, if you define, you confine. So yeah, just having negating lines like that, it kind of feels like the opposite of loosening up the canon or continuity or whatever you want to call it. I know that Doctor Who is known for not having a strict canon policy like some of these other franchises. It feels more loose. But yeah, in The Devil's Chord, Ruby and the Doctor, they go to February 1963, February 11th, specifically, if I remember correctly. And they go to Abbey Road Studios. They do the crosswalk thing. At this point, it's known as EMI. And they go inside and they see the Beatles record a song. It's a song about dogs, but it's not an actual Beatles song. And so they realize something is wrong, and they see all these other recording sessions where um, people are recording music that doesn't sound very inspired and feels very off. And that all ties back to the cold opening, which I forgot to mention, where we see the villain of this episode, the maestro, and the opening theme kind of segueing from the piano bit was a very inspired way to open the episode. But yeah, like music has been pretty much, like people are not getting inspired to make good music. They just kind of see it as like, when they talk to John and Paul from the Beatles, it's kind of like they're going through the motions, just getting work done, just making money. So the maestro is pretty much sucking the joy out of making music or having music being created. And the result of this is that in the future, in Ruby's time in 2024, which people were bothered by the 6 month time skip between Space Babies and the Devil's Chord, 6 or 7 months, June or July. I'm not bothered by this. I'm fine with Ruby and the Doctor already having the dynamic that they have now. I did see that Big Finish over on their socials where, like, the Patrick Star gif of him like rubbing his hands. It's like the caption said something like, when it's revealed there's a unaccounted 6 month gap between episodes. And it's like, you know that they're going to take advantage of that when they eventually make 15th Doctor Adventures audios in like 10 years or something. 15th Doctor and Ruby having some more adventures between these episodes. Um, and yeah, like the whole thing of music not being as prominent in this history is that in 2024 there's a nuclear winter. Humankind has been annihilated because of the absence of great music. And I quite like how this thematically, intentionally or not, ties back to uh, Twice Upon a Time, the Christmas special at the end of the 12th Doctor's era where he meets the first Doctor. And there's that World War I battle that gets stopped because of Christmas carols, the Christmas armistice. And I quite like how this kind of complements that idea that music saves people. It can stop war, it can stop fighting. So yeah, I thought that was a nice little, possibly unintentional tie there. I do a vlog slash podcast with my dad called Yes Shift, where we talk about the band Yes and some other prog rock stuff. And music really is a huge thing that can really make life better. It just is. So I kind of like how these episodes really hammer that home. I should mention that the Doctor also makes reference to his granddaughter Susan. When they're in February 11th, 1963, he mentions that the first Doctor is with his granddaughter Susan over down there at the lane, and that he can't cross time streams. And I thought that was kind of nice because there are instances where if you pay attention to the date, there are multiple doctors running around in London. Like you might have the first and seventh Doctor in 1963 London around the same time. I think the second Doctor and the first Doctor even inhabited like the same place on the same date, but didn't cross paths. So it's kind of fun to acknowledge that type of thing. But yeah, the Doctor mentions he doesn't know what happened to Susan, and he mentions genocide across time and space. He said it was a cellular explosion, and again, this can be kind of confusing whether or not you have the context of how this happened, because it can lead people to think one thing when it's actually the other thing. And it's also like, which event does Russell T have in mind for this? So I'll delve into that a bit more again, like at the very end of this. But yeah, this whole thing of like what happened to Susan, it's a huge question that I've wanted answered in the show for a long time. There are Eighth Doctor audios and a Time War audio that are really excellent and have Susan in them, and they're really good. So um, yeah, so I think it, and again, the Doctor kind of laughs off some of this stuff that seems to be burdening him, and Ruby gives him a hug. So again, seeming fine on the outside, but having a lot of sadness on the inside. It kind of feels like Russell T doing his greatest hits again, but in a different way on the surface. It's not like the 10th Doctor where he would be clearly sad on the outside and be very dramatic about it and maybe tear up a bit. So I kind of wonder if Russell T is trying to make it at least look a bit different, if that makes sense. But speaking of family, we find out that the maestro is, the child of the toy maker. So that was kind of a surprise. And I should mention that because of the maestro's appearance, I was kind of getting Tim Burton's Alice in Wonderland vibes. Um, so and yeah, it was a very this was a very interesting villain. All the music related stuff. And I think I forgot to mention this, but the reason that you don't hear Beatles music in this is because of how expensive it is to feature music by the Beatles. So this episode is basically the premise is basically inspired by the idea of figuring out a way to feature the Beatles but not use their music. And the showdown was interesting. Ruby having a song within her. There were some callbacks here and there, maybe more than I was able to catch. I did get the Rose song vibe. There were some visuals of CGI music notes. I could have done without those. I thought they were distracting to me at least. But yeah, I did think this was an interesting showdown. Um, uh, the music itself in the episode, I was kind of hoping it would be more. I don't know, like it didn't really. I didn't really vibe with some of the music as much as I was hoping to. I really enjoyed the Goblin song in the church on Ruby Road. Some of the music in this was kind of just fine. I was kind of hoping for more. Like I've been saying, I would really love a full on musical episode in this modern era of Doctor Who. So I do kind of wish there had been more done with that. That I guess maybe would have um, resonated a bit more with me. I know lots of people really loved this episode. I thought it was fine. There was some good stuff, but I could have liked it more. And again, it's just my personal taste. But yeah, when they defeat the maestro, there's this reference once again to the one who waits. And there's speculation on that, which I'll get to in a bit. I'll give a little warning before that, I guess. Um, and the doctor, there's fourth wall breaking in this, which is not new in Doctor Who. The first Doctor did it in a scene involving Christmas. The fourth Doctor has definitely looked directly in the camera. The 12th Doctor has broken the fourth wall. My headcanon reasoning is that the Doctor is just aware that their life is a TV show in an alternate universe. I do recall an 11th Doctor comic where he goes to an alternate universe and meets Matt Smith. So that's kind of my reasoning for this sort of thing. But the Doctor pretty much breaks the fourth wall and he says at the end of these things, there's always a twist, and you kind of expect a twist ending, but I kind of like how this subverts that and instead ends with a musical number. Everyone's dancing around. It's like there's always a twist. There's always a twist. There's always a twist at the end. And I really like this actually. And there's the whole Agatha title card thing. Marvel. There's a bit of news about that today, and I'm of the. I don't know if this is a hot take, but I like this. There's always a twist at the end bit more than Agatha all along. It's Agatha all along, or however it went. But apparently, this musical number has been a point of contention for a bunch of people. Some people love it and some people really hate it. And I'm wondering why exactly do they hate this moment? What's wrong with this silly musical, this bit of levity? And like, how can you not expect this in an episode so music based like this one? Like, I don't get it. And lots of people are using it as quote unquote evidence that Doctor Who is dead and that it should be canceled forever. And it's like, what are you on about? Like, what's your problem? Like, yeah, like I know there are people who just hate musicals or musical numbers in general, like just right away. And I don't get it. I mean, look, I know I dismissed the booger stuff in the previous episode, like for my f- reasons, because it's like really gross. So I don't know if maybe to some people that's how musicals are to them, but I just don't get it. It doesn't compute to me. It's yeah, I don't know. But like the worst thing ever, like musical numbers being the worst thing ever, like come on, give me a break. Although I will say that if music rights weren't an issue, an alternative great way to end this would have been for, the doctor saying there's always a twist, and then you see the Beatles playing Twist and Shout, which was a closing track on their first album, Please Please Me, which is about this era. Although I think they started recording that album a few months earlier than February, but just time related stuff. I saw there was a little bit of a back and forth online about how apparently Susan was not on Earth with the Doctor this early in 1963, but the line of dialogue from An Unearthly Child, where she says the last 5 months have been amazing, or whatever the line is. Maybe the first few months were kind of miserable for Susan. So, I don't think it's a big continuity error. It's pretty easy to fix, in my opinion. Yeah, that's pretty much this episode, The Devil's Chord. I'd give it a 7.5 out of 10. Like I said, the music, I didn't vibe with it, some of it as much as I would have liked. But I did notice that, yeah, after the mention of the one who waits, this I saw that the sign on the top of this building said the name Chris Waits, and apparently this is a little Easter egg. Chris Waits, or the band Chris Waits and the Carolers, had a mention in the first ever Doctor Who episode, An Unearthly Child, apparently. So yeah, another little callback to that. And I guess I'll go ahead and go into the speculation on the one who waits that's been going around. I've seen people talk about this online, and I think there is something to it, but I could also see it maybe being a red herring, maybe a disappointing bait and switch, because that has happened. But basically, people have pointed out that there's someone named Susan Twist playing multiple characters in this era of Doctor Who so far. And so Susan Twist, there's always a twist at the end. So a bunch of people think the one who waits might be Susan, whom the Doctor left back way back when. And so maybe she is the one who waits, and maybe that could negate some of the Brilliant to Big Finish stuff. But you could say the Time War altered things, or maybe the Toy Maker altered some stuff. I don't know. But yeah, I think there is something to that, because why mention Susan at all? Like in an episode that's bringing people back, not only back into Doctor Who, but also potentially a starting point for some new fans. Like it kind of feels sort of random to just mention Susan, like even by just this much, however little it was. So maybe we could see her come back. I predict that when we, or I should say if, because I'm not really sure that it will be a possibility, but if we do see her, I think we'll see another incarnation of her played by someone else. And then later we'll see Carol Ann Ford, the Doctor. Susan might be upset at the Doctor for not coming back or something, but then they will both time travel and see the previous incarnation of Susan toward the end of her life, and so played by Carol Ann Ford as she is now. And there will be some closure, a heart to heart talk between her and the Doctor. And the reason that uh, that Susan doesn't remember this is because, with a past and future incarnation of Susan both being present, it alters, it wipes away the memories. So that's my wild prediction. And it looks like this next episode, Boom, which apparently this is the one that Stephen Moffat came back for as writer. It seems like it might once again touch upon the Doctor's war torn past, which kind of thought we were past this for a while now, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah, but my prediction is that, we see in the preview that I guess he steps on a mine. My prediction is this landmine is actually more like some sort of mine thing, like as in mining, looking for gems and whatnot. And boom might refer to like some sort of gold boom or whatever the uh, valuable thing is people might be mining for. I think it could be a bait and switch, possibly. But yeah, that's kind of my goofy guess for like what that's all about. So now we get into the part where I sort of touch on stuff from the 13th Doctor's era in relation to a couple of things brought up in these episodes. Um, well, first off, what one of the things I noticed, like before I get into that, was that the Doctor mentions his soul getting torn in half, and that makes one look at the giggle a bit differently. It seemed like such a happy moment, and now like suddenly, oh wow, the Doctor like found it to be very painful. I guess it's, yeah, it kind of shows a different way of looking at it. But going back to like the other stuff, like the Doctor being adopted and Gallifrey being gone, and again, these are things that are huge things in the 13th Doctor's era. What I find fascinating is the broad strokes approach. Again, Russell T Davies is not negating the quote unquote controversial stuff in the 13th Doctor's era, but he's also presenting it in a way that doesn't overwhelm new viewers or returning viewers who skipped over that era with a bunch of information. So what's strange is that if you skip over the, well, how do I put this? If you stopped watching Doctor Who after the first time David Tennant left, the end of time, and then you come back in for the 60th anniversary specials when he comes back and then continue with Shooty, you might not be phased by the mention of Gallifrey being gone. It might just be like, oh yeah, Gallifrey's gone. I knew that. Even if you left midway through Matt Smith's era, because Gallifrey was still gone, then this might not be such a strange change. Gallifrey being gone again, it might play off to those viewers who left way back, early 2010s. It might just seem like, oh yeah, of course Gallifrey's gone, so he's bringing that up again. Now, if one were to get through the Moffat era, or a good chunk of the Moffat era, so maybe Day of the Doctor, they see that Gallifrey is saved and it's said to be hidden in a bubble universe or a pocket universe, whatever it was that they said. So they know Gallifrey is no longer dead. And if you get through the 12th Doctor's era, you know that he eventually found it in a bubble universe. So one who has gone through that era, or most of it, or a good chunk of it, might know that Gallifrey was back and then be confused when hearing the 15th Doctor say that Gallifrey is gone and that he's the last of the Time Lords. It would be like, wait, what happened to Gallifrey? Like if you got through the Moffat era and then for whatever reason skipped over the 60th anniversary specials and just started with Shooty Gatwa, you might think that the entire Moffat era is being ignored or erased, and we're just supposed to pretend that everything post the first Russell T era it should just be forgotten. It's not canon anymore, or canon air quotes or whatever. But if you came back, if you went through the Moffat era, then skipped over Chibnall/13's era, and then came back via the 60th anniversary specials, particularly the Giggle, which has that puppet show recapping what happened to the Moffat era companions, then you see, oh, okay, that era is not being ignored. This is all still in continuity. And then, wait, the Flux? What is this? So, the Flux wiped out some worlds across the universe. So I could see someone who skipped over the 13th Doctor's era perhaps mistakenly believing that the Flux is what killed Gallifrey. And sort of confusing things further is in Space Babies, the 15th Doctor says there was a genocide, and that is true, but he doesn't give the full context. And then in The Devil's Chord, he says genocide spread across time and space like a cellular explosion. And I'm not quite sure if in that instant he's referring to the Time War or the second time Gallifrey was destroyed, which, if in the 13th Doctor's era, was done by the Master. The Master destroyed Gallifrey, and there was also, I think there was something that happened in that series 12, where something wiped out all organic life on the planet as well. So I'm not sure which instance the 15th Doctor is referring to in The Devil's Chord, but yeah, I can see how it can be kind of confusing for those not in the know, and for those in the know, like which time does he mean, you know? And of course, the thing about the Doctor being adopted, that was another thing that happened in series 12. The Master destroyed Gallifrey because he found out the Doctor's origins and how the Doctor is pretty much a part of not just the Master, but all of the Time Lords. The big revelation was that the Doctor is the timeless child. If you watch if you only hear the 15th Doctor saying, "Oh, I was adopted by the Time Lords," you might just think, "Oh yeah, the Doctor's parents just adopted him after, or adopted them rather, after they were found." And but there's a lot more details to that. The Doctor was a child in front of a portal that was found by Tecteun, and then there was a discovery of regeneration as the Doctor, the timeless child at the time, was regenerating into these other timeless children. And there are these hidden incarnations of the Doctor that are pre William Hartnell, the Morbius Doctors and the Fugitive Doctor. Those revelations, they're not mentioned so far in these recent episodes. And again, it's streamlining, it's broad strokes, not outright ignoring, and somewhat more palatable to returning viewers. But yeah, it's kind of strange. Like, there these huge details, but we're getting like a more streamlined explanation, and it makes sense that the Doctor would feel maybe there's like a lot of baggage and doesn't want to elaborate too much on the past, and wants to simplify it, not overwhelm the new companion. Although at this point now, she's been traveling with him for half a year apparently. But yeah, it's a strange approach, or maybe not a strange approach. Just the conclusions that this approach could lead people to, depending on what they've watched and what they haven't watched. It's kind of fascinating to me, and I do wonder if, as this series season progresses, if some of those finer details from the 13th Doctor's era might become relevant again. And I know people had a huge problem with the timeless child revelation. I don't have a problem with it. I always loved the idea of there being pre-Hartnell doctors. Back when I watched the Brain of Morbius, like 10 and a half years ago or whenever it was, I liked this mysterious idea of there being pre-Hartnell incarnations, and I love the Fugitive Doctor. I still don't like the idea of Gallifrey being destroyed once again, though. And that was a Chris Chibnall move. But also, I also feel that Stephen Moffat, once he brought Gallifrey back, it felt like he didn't know what to do with it. So I kind of feel like maybe Chris Chibnall didn't know what to do with it either, other than destroy it and use it as a motivation for the master and these revelations about the doctor. And I really don't think he needed the destruction of Gallifrey once again for that. And now, because of that decision, it feels like Russell T, his era has brought things back to a status quo that's all too familiar. And I think it's silly that people didn't know what to do with Gallifrey when we've seen some really great stories in, the Big Finish audios, for example. I do have a very wild prediction, though, that the Time Lords will come back because, since they're extinct, maybe they're legend, and because they're legend, the salt brings them back. You could throw in an explanation like that. So, and I kind of do hope for that because the Time Lords being back but not knowing what their home is now, where do they go without having Gallifrey? I think that's a very interesting story idea to try out, if they go that route. But yeah, that's pretty much all the thoughts I have on all that. Um, these episodes, I had mixed feelings on Space Babies. The Devil's Chord I thought was better, but I didn't enjoy quite as much as I thought I would. But yeah, I'm gonna keep watching this series and see where it goes. And yeah, just keep on being a Whovian. So until next time, I'll see you around.